Hello. Are you finding yourself that you're trying to escape from reality more and more into fantasy and daydreams and games and things which really aren't your real life? Or are you finding that imaginary personas which are coming from these areas of fantasy, fictional people, fictional things which you put on are coming more and more to dominate your life as you interact with others? So I'm going to give some ideas on how to get to the root of the problem. I would say that moderate to severe cases, you really should seek professional help, but I'll um, give you maybe some ideas even there. I think it's possible to get to the root of the problem, to grow out of fantasy escapism and dissociation, and that would include regression where you regress levels from adult back to childhood, back to adolescence perhaps, and regression, we could call that nostalgia gone too far, where you start to act out earlier stages in your life behaviors and where you act really immature for an adult. And we do see this a lot nowadays. Where it came up with the term lately, kidults, kids with nostalgia for toys. And well, there are some. I really don't want to have to go back to the toys I had when I was a kid. I don't really have any sort of special affection for them or wanting for them. And unfortunately, although I worked in as I worked in software development for a lot of times, sometimes people would try to give us little toy-like gifts and gifts, maybe even toys themselves, simple of the kind of nostalgia that is going too far, fantasy, escapism, dissociation, pornography. I believe, is an ultimate type of romantic fantasy, escapism, and dissociation. And I'm not alone there. A lot of people will say that it's a case where you're leaving reality to go into this imaginary area of sexual opportunity, fulfillment, and so on. Or even romance can be, I think for guys, sometimes we may look at ourselves in different types of movies as a romantic hero who gets the girl, or the macho man which conquers all and gets everything at the end. Um, so I can remember how some of the people I knew when I was growing up grew the same type of mustache as Charles Bronson had. They tried to be Charles Bronson, and I could remember some guys I saw at the gym who, on the days that Triple H um, was great in the WWE, they tried to be Triple H. They even had the water bottle. They tried to be on the weights that way. So trying to be someone other than yourself, I think, is a sign that there needs to be some things that happen. I think it's a sign of escapism, fantasy, and can be dissociation. Wikipedia defines dissociation this way as a concept that's developed over time as a wide array of experiences ranging from a mild emotional detachment from the immediate surroundings to a more severe disconnection from physical and emotional experiences. The most characteristic of all dissociative phenomena includes a detachment from reality rather than a loss of reality as a psychosis. So this kind of detachment, becoming more and more detached, that could be a real problem. And there have been a couple times in my own life as I'm speaking, and I'm speaking this as someone who is from the outside looking in, but someone who has experienced this a couple times in my own life. At best, fantasy can escapism can be a temporary refuge if you're in a difficult time, but it's never, never as helpful as coming down and facing the difficulties. Maybe a couple of hours in a film or something like that, but face the difficulties eventually. Face the problems as an adult. Spend the time trying to deal with your problems and difficulties. And for myself as a Christian, according to biblical guidance and wisdom and prayer and biblical actions and responses. Sometimes we don't deal with the last part. Biblical actions and responses like forgiveness, loving others, seeking to get away from a bad relationship, distance ourselves, and so on. And one of the biggest times I can remember of dissociation happened during a time before I came to know Christ, from about time I was in sixth grade to uh, almost my senior year, a period of about 5 years. TV show Dark Shadows was on, and that made me curious about occult practices, the practices there, and astrology, and the Ouija board were fashionable then. So I was drawn in to occult practices, and they nearly destroyed me. Okay. I would give this question also to anyone who's really into Harry Potter. If it's leading you into the occult, I would stay away from Harry Potter in those cases. If you're making you curious about doing these things like astrology, Ouija board, and so on, casting spells and so on, actually doing that stuff, rather than seeing it as a fantasy world for entertainment, walk away from that, please. I don't think that's going to be good for you. But going on my personal experience, I did experience about after I was a believer about 7 years. I was in a real difficult time, and I found myself from one of C.S. Lewis's books, Out of the Silent Planet, of all that cases, the Expedition to Mars. Some of the personas began to affect my own behavior and then I checked myself really quickly and walked away from it and sought to deal with the problems as best I could. So this is something that is part of maturation to grow out of pretend play, escapes, and like that, where you may be trying on behaviors and ideas for adulthood. And our character, our development should really go on as we become adults to walk away from those things, to appreciate them, but not live in them, let them affect our waking life. And this is one of the things that we actually saw in the Big Bang Theory, that the main characters gradually were growing out of their own ways to more adult ways, something more normal. And of course, they were in the video games and the fantasy and like that, but they started to grow into more normal behavior in adults by the end. And that was something I really thought was welcome, because it meant that although you may live there at some times, you don't have to stay there, and growing out is the best thing to do. Unfortunately, I do want to warn you that regression, dissociation, fantasy escapism can become really potentially dangerous. I've spoken on other videos about my friend Lisa Hollinger, who was murdered back in September 1978, and the man who did it was someone who I had met. He had been a former boyfriend of hers. And back in the winter of 1977, 1978, he started getting into, I believe, from what Lisa's mother told me, Dungeons and Dragons more and more. His mental health deteriorated substantially, and he began to be more and more bizarre. So Lisa, although she tried to help him, did find herself in a place where she needed to break up, and she did break up with him at that point. And then he followed her, stalked her across from the United States to Germany, and murdered her in September 1978. And regression, we believe that was a real part in the definite mental illness, which led to her murder, him being a murderer. And during those days, I also remember another friend who escaped into Dungeons and Dragons from reality. I'm not saying that Dungeons and Dragons is all wrong and all bad. That there are other people on the internet you can find to say that. I don't know enough about it to give a strong no on that, a strong warning. But he had to leave college and come back home and attend university at home, because being around with others who were playing Dungeons and Dragons pulled him away from his classes, pulled him away from reality, and he had to come back home. So this shows that there can be real danger to yourself and to others if you go too far into escapism, dissociation, like that. So, and again, going on some of the life effects that I've seen, some of the possible underlying symptoms also. Life effects can be persistent immaturity and a lack of enjoyment of more adult activities, relationships, and being fulfilling your responsibilities well. And people complain about adulting. Well, fulfilling your responsibilities well as an adult can be really very enjoyable. I don't have much sympathy with people who complain about fulfilling adult responsibilities, except to say that if you go beyond the discomfort you can probably find that just simply fulfilling normal adult responsibilities can be very enjoyable, a task fulfilled well. So consider whether when you were growing up, perhaps, or during your adult development, were there a lack of opportunities to learn life skills and the satisfaction of a task fulfilled well? Recently, I went back and looked at the 1911 Boy Scout Manual for boys starting at age 12. You can find that on Amazon. It's very inexpensive. You can find it online. And the stuff they were teaching boys to do during their adolescence, they were building men. The stuff that adult responsibilities, and that they could eventually, at some point, take those skills that they were learning, they and become, put them into practice in their life, in their employment, along with in their community, and so on. So, was there a lack of opportunities to learn your life skills? Is maybe why they're dissatisfying. Another symptom, life effect would be the temptation to find childish and even wicked solutions or magic solutions, looking to magic, that's something magical, rather than your normal effort or responsibility to fulfill your needs. Are you maybe confusions about your identity again, where personas that you've come across somewhere are leading you to be confused about your identity? Are there challenges also in your personal development and difficulties which you had, which you haven't really faced? And fantasy and escapism and so on can give you some real counterfeit remedies for personal insecurities, your personal problems. And so I'd ask you, going on here, did you feel stifled or infantilized as you were growing up, as you were seeking to go on the genuine personal development appropriate to the stage that you were at that life? Just think about that. Think about that. Were you held back from doing things that others were doing at your life stage? Were you treated as someone who was much younger than you really were and kept back? Was there also abuse and a lack of personal freedom when you're growing up? Did you sense that someone was trying to hijack your life, to exploit you for their own weaknesses, insecurities, and failed or arrogant ambitions? Were you abused, neglected? Was there a lack of personal freedom to explore things when you were growing up, to explore what it meant for you to grow up? Or did you find someone else trying to hijack your life? Was there also in your family, in your social circle, school, wherever, were you subjected to persistent family denigration, social denigration, and contempt? Were you always being bullied? Did you always feel, or persistently, consistently, in a one down, inferior position where people were trying to keep you down with your family and friends in your social environment? I don't mean trying to keep you from being point at the top of the heap, but just simply keep you on a reasonable peer relationship with those who were your age or skill peers, whatever they may be. Or did you feel like there's someone who was always waiting there to slap you down or beat you down if you expressed an opinion, whether good or bad, just simply expressing the opinion, asking a question, or showed legitimate goals, desires, and achievements? Was there someone trying to slap you down and beat you down? So, I said I was going to come back to this, and I will now. Seek counseling depending on how much it rules your life, especially if you have good reason to believe this is rooted in persistent and deep trauma, perhaps a symptom of complex post-traumatic stress disorder, CPTSD, or some other problem where you really should seek professional therapy. And this would definitely be, Wikipedia also talks about some symptoms of more pathological dissociation, and I'll name those. A sense that self or the world is unreal, depersonalization and derealization, a loss of memory, amnesia, forgetting identity or assuming a new self, fugue, are separate streams of consciousness, identity, and self. Dissociative identity disorder, formerly termed multiple personality disorder, and complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And I think that a lot of those would really come down to the last one most, complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And also, if at this point you're hearing voices, seeing terrible things in the night terrors, being tempted to murder or suicide, you may well have come into contact with demons. I've experienced the demonic myself. So, my appeal to you, come to Christ. The Son of God was manifest that he might destroy the works of the devil, and those who were his have been transferred out of the kingdom of darkness into his kingdom. So learn to resist. If you are a Christian, come to Christ if you're not, and seek counsel from a pastor and elders or a Bible-believing in a Bible-believing church if you really have found this to be a persistent problem. Ask them if they've dealt with demonic oppression. Use those two words, demonic oppression. And if they come up with this long thing, but just simply some small thing, but simply they just want to talk to you in a serious and kind manner, private manner too, but if they want to go on to some sort of extensive ritual of deliverance, I would say find another place. Find someone who will take you seriously and who isn't going to bring you into some sort of grandiose deliverance ritual. And sometimes, though, for a lot of people, just simple reflection will prevent a growing tendency if you start to see the escapism, the nostalgia going wrong, going into dissociation. It can keep simply recognizing the tendency from becoming a life-dominating problem. So I put down some things which I've thought over, and some questions, some writing prompts, some things that have helped to jar me out of any time that I've felt myself starting to go back into those ideas. So just consider, what do you dislike about yourself? What did you dislike about yourself in the past? What are you disliking about your situation now? What do you dislike about your life, the way it's progressed? And maybe consider also with what you dislike, what you like, what your resources are, what your triumphs and your victories actually are. And so, if we're talking about regression and escapism, what are you thinking or doing that is not appropriate to your age and stage of life and personal development? Have you been ignoring something? Is there unfinished business that you've been glossing over or forgetting or failing to recognize? Sometimes I think we talk about denial. Sometimes I would put that as an active failure and unwillingness to recognize what is happening. And what is there in your life that others have pinpointed as weird? Not people who want to beat you down, but people who may actually have your best interests at heart. What have they pinpointed as weird? Something that may be not appropriate to your age and stage of life and personal development. Sometimes other people target mannerisms, so maybe something you need to deal with. Maybe your personal grooming or something like that. Other times activities. But be careful to consider. Use your adult understanding to consider what they're saying, whether what they're saying about you is weird, is really unusual for your age, for your personal development, for your stage of life, for your what you are, or maybe it's something that they just simply dislike. In that case, it may be a relationship that's the problem. You're a relationship with someone who really doesn't like some things about you. Maybe you should really put some distance there. And maybe that'll help you right there, just simply to distance yourself from that relationship. And so, what are more adult versions of the mannerisms and activities that you or other people may see as weird or inappropriate for your age? And how can you grow into more adult versions of these activities? So, adult activities, we need to really consider those. What they can be, because at our stage of life, it can often be much more enjoyable than the things that we're living with in regression. And consider in what ways were you devalued, not heard socially or among your family? And what did you want to say in those situations? think about those things. You don't. These things might be things you need to think about for a little while, for over a period of days, weeks, maybe even months. But how can you express yourself now in a more adult and assertive way? And if you're a Christian, I especially ask you, what does the Word of God say about these things that you're dealing with? Ask God to be led to His guidance of the Word. Simply ask. He's willing to hear. And maybe you need to consider, what do I need to change about myself over the course of time or now? Are there simple things that I can do right now, some baby steps, some simple goals that I can pursue? Maybe there's some areas of simply assertive behavior I need to put in, some, consider the steps that you need to take, the resources you have, and so on. Go ahead and write these down, and if these are causing you some pain and anguish, share them with God. And if you need to cry, even maybe shout, I would say be respectful of God. I don't think you need to yell at him to tear him down, but if it's a case of bringing out what's causing you anguish, go ahead. He's big enough to take you at your worst. But I say, be respectful, because he is God. And maybe share all these things I'm talking about with a counselor. Find one trustworthy and competent. And about putting these things to God, there's a little verse I'd like to give to you right now. Trust in him at all times, O people. Pour out your heart before him. God is a refuge for us. That's Psalm 62:8. And one of the things I have found over all these years, living as an adult, and whatever my situation is, growing up, maturing, figuring out these things, even if I haven't had much help from others, even other believers who sat back and gloated if I fell into problems, living as an adult conquering is far more enjoyable. Emotional health is enjoyable. Living as an adult that's appropriate to your stage of life is very enjoyable. Getting out of dissociation, out of fantasy, out of escapism. Again, there are things for entertainment which we can indulge in and maybe use after a hard week or something like that, but we don't want to live there. We don't want to live in fantasy like that. But I'd leave that with you right there. It's a lot better to be an adult than it is to continue living in immaturity. Immaturity, emotionally unhealthy, spiritually unhealthy, and growing out of it is much more enjoyable. Leave the pain and misery behind. And what comes to God, as I said before, trust in him at all times, O people. Pour out your heart before him. God is a refuge for us. He is a refuge for you, for whatever you're trying to run from reality to the reality of the everlasting arms. So I hope this has been helpful. Hope this can help give you some guidance if you're facing these things today. And I want to say that I wish the best for you. And I wish that you would find your way out, because to find your way to a reality which works for you at this stage in your life. Thank you for your time and attention.